Okay, we only have an hour and we have so much to go over, so I'm just going to jump right in. I'm Jonathan Weisman. I'm an editor at the New York Times. I have written a lot about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and especially its politics in the United States. And I just want to acknowledge that this is a remarkable day to be having this. I won't say that the war in Gaza has ended, even though the President of the United States did, but I will say that the ceasefire seems to be holding, and this is a day when 20 hostages were released by Hamas, Israeli hostages, and something like 2,000 Palestinian prisoners were released as well. And I just want to first ask Emmanuelle how it feels in Israel today.
Hi, hello everybody. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pretty historic day. We can say that very surely. It's an amazing feeling. Of course, there is a sense of release. People can breathe. You can see that on their faces. You know, I was on the hostage family square in Tel Aviv on October 7th, a few days ago. And the feeling, and something was happening, we knew, but the feeling was sad and heavy. It was tears all over. And remembering this horrific day, the worst in Israel history. And then 2 days after, 9th of October, there is an agreement. I went back to the square and you see smiles, you see families coming, and the families of the hostages were already looking completely different. But today, you can finally see that Israel is coming out of October 7th because the society was stuck for 2 years. But the happiness is also with mixed emotions because you have families that will never be able to hug their loved ones, as the amazing pictures we saw today of families reunited at the hospital of the 20 hostages coming from Gaza. I spoke with two mothers. One of them is Iris Chaim, the mother of Yotam Chaim. He was one of 3 hostages that got shot by mistake by IDF when they tried to escape Hamas inside Gaza. And she tells me that she feels that every time she sees a hug between a mother and the children and her children, her son, it reminds her that she will never have that. And it's like a stab in her heart once again. So she's asking if it's possible to be happy, but in a humble way. And there's another mother that talks to me. Her name is Elina Kaminka. Her son, Yanai, was a soldier protecting civilians in Zikim on the border of Gaza on October 7th. He was killed by Hamas. And she tells me something very similar, but a little bit different. She says, because I can never hug my son again, then when I see a mother today hugging her son, I know what she feels, and I'm so happy for her. So it's very mixed emotions. And then there is also the acknowledgement that when this is over, there are going to be bodies coming back. 4 of them, I think 2 of them or 4 of them, I'm not sure, I'm sorry, just came back also today, which means funerals and also hard moments. And then there's going to be coping with the Israeli society that's going to go back to political issues and hard feelings and a lot of hard and tough questions to ask. So today is a full, happy, mixed emotion days, and we know complexity is coming very soon.
And Representative Rashid, talk to me about the feeling in the Palestinian diaspora. What is your sense? What is the sense of the community that you live in, and what is the sense of whether this will hold?
Thank you, Jonathan, and the IOP for hosting this important conversation. Palestinians, first of all, the first thing we're observing is the reaction of the people in Gaza, who are feeling a sense of relief at not at having peace, not at having freedom, but at having an absence of genocide, right? There is just a sense of relief that there is a mere absence of additional torment and pure bloodshed and bombs dropping on neighborhoods. So we're relieved that they get to experience some respite. I can't speculate as to whether it'll hold or not. Of course, we certainly hope that we won't go back to the genocide resuming. But I think what's important to remember and to really internalize is that we have seen a genocide unfold over 2 years. And so, and that is not a matter of debate. The International Association of Genocide Scholars has concluded this. An independent UN commission has concluded this. The South Africa case in the International Court of Justice has led to the arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and other senior Israeli leaders. In fact, just the Washington Post last week reported that 40%, 4 in 10 American Jews believe that Israel has committed a genocide. Not 4 in 10 Jewish Democrats or 4 in 10 young Jews, 4 in 10 American Jews, the entire Jewish population, believe that a genocide has occurred. And so the question becomes, one, how did we let this happen? What were the and many of us have been screaming at the top of our lungs about what we need to do to stop it, including my colleagues and I. On October 8th, 2023, we released a letter saying we need de-escalation. Ceasefire wasn't even in the lingo yet. We need de-escalation, we need peace, and we need to address root causes. We got major backlash for saying de-escalate, address root causes. Now everyone knows that's exactly what needed to happen. And I heard an interview with an Israeli man who was being interviewed by Mahdi Hassan a few days ago, who lost both of his parents on October 7th. And he said that this should have immediately been reckoned with on October 8th, where we should have said, okay, pause, what's going on? How do we not allow this to continue? And that is what many of us were trying to do. And then, of course, in addition to reckoning with how we let this happen, it's now what do we do moving forward? Mm-hmm. Should the U.S. continue to supply unlimited or any military aid to Israel? Right? Should a state like Illinois continue to have a law on its books that punishes companies that boycott Israel? So we have a lot of work ahead of us.
And Jeremy, I want to ask you about the G word, genocide, that Representative Rashid just used, and the evolution of thought among, well, your personal evolution of thought on this, and among the supporters and members of J Street, which is a liberal, pro-Israel organization that has gone through a lot in the last 2 years.
Well, I would start by saying that everybody who's involved in J Street and anybody in my part of the American Jewish community is simply horrified by what was done in Gaza as a result of what happened on October 7th. That doesn't mean we're not horrified by what happened on October 7th, but we are also firmly of the belief that the level of devastation, the denial of aid, the types of weapons that were used and the way they were used are just inappropriate. And it's a moral question that our leadership in our community didn't step forward and say that this was not right. And we can debate all we want about the use of the word genocide or other words that can be used, but there's a moral line of right and wrong, and what happened is wrong. And there has to be a sense of looking at what happened and what our accountability and responsibility will be. But I'm much more interested, Jonathan, and I hope that all of us can be, in what we do from October 13th, 2025 forward. What is really important now is that whatever opportunity there is in order to put into place a long-lasting and real solution to the underlying problem, and I think that's what the representative is getting at, that there is an underlying conflict here between the Palestinian people and the Jewish people over this land, and until we resolve that conflict in a way that preserves the security and gives opportunity to both peoples, the entire Middle East will continue to be unstable, and we will continue to face days, weeks, months, and years like we have just been through. So I'm really interested in looking forward and saying, what can we do to work towards solutions now?
Well, I don't want to be backward looking, so I'll just say from this point on, I mean, at this moment, where do you think the politics of Israel is in the United States, Israel, Palestine in the United States?
Well, I think that both parties, interestingly enough, are seeing a break. In the Democratic Party, there is a very strong backlash against the kind of unquestioning support that has been provided till now. There is a real desire to have really significant conditions on how our weapons and our support for Israel can be used. But there remains, I think, a consensus around a long-term support for a state of Israel. At the same time, on the Republican side, there is starting to be a break as well, where you see significant percentages of Republicans, whether it is because they are isolationist as a general matter, or there is a specific upset over what Israel has done. But this is a first for me in the last decade or two to see a real break happening in the Republican Party. And I see this as an opportunity. I think people of goodwill from the Democratic Party and the Republican Party who want to try to be part of a solution here and to build a better future. I think there's an opportunity for us to come together and try to chart a better path forward.
Now, that leads me perfectly to Dan here. So, Dan, you have a pulse on the MAGA coalition's views on foreign policy. And, I remember when Benjamin Netanyahu was working openly against Barack Obama, and he was warned at that time, you shouldn't make Israel into a partisan issue. That is going to be a very, very dangerous place for U.S.-Israeli relations. And his sense was, and they were open about it, they said, it doesn't matter because we will have the Republicans. The Republicans are beholden to their evangelical base, and we'll have enough Jewish Democrats to keep the Democrats not largely in line. But in the end, the Republican Party is ours. And I want to know where his miscalculation was and what you are seeing among Trump supporting Republicans and perhaps a generational issue in the Republican Party.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I think this is an important question. So, I just have a confession to make to start out is that, I almost considered not doing this event, and I have generally avoided talking about Israel in my career in public policy, primarily because it just wasn't a focus area of mine. But just our debate here in the United States has just become so degraded. And in my view, you just haven't been able to have a productive conversation around specific policy proposals, specifically through the lens of what is best for America's safety and security and the conditions of our economic prosperity. And I think there are so many good reasons why we currently have a ceasefire, and all credit to the Trump administration for achieving that. And I hope that we get to phase 2 and a more permanent, lasting peace. But I hope that one of the domestic benefits is that there's more space to have a productive conversation about our future relationship with Israel. One that understands, in my view, there actually are real benefits to having a security relationship with Israel. That's something that I've always said, but at the same time centers it through a real focus on okay, what are our interests in the region? Take into account our other challenges and priorities around the world, and go forward and get us to a better place that ultimately benefits Americans, and I think in many ways will ultimately benefit Israel and the region. But putting that aside, I think that there's a few things going on in the right that are worth discussing. First and foremost, all due respect to Jeremy, is there's not an isolationist wing in the Republican Party. That's not an accurate way to describe the foreign policy consensus that's emerging. It is more realist. It is more America first. I'd say there's more focus on our own hemisphere, but it does recognize the use of American power globally to achieve American ends. And I think you saw that in this peace deal. But there is much more skepticism of overseas entanglements and in the military sense. And I would say that, among many Republicans at the grassroots level and at the policy level, the policy elites in DC where I'm at now, is that particularly over the last 7, 8, 9 months, there was concerns that some of the policies that the Israeli government was driving would ultimately lead to the United States getting pulled into a potential another major Middle East war. And you saw this debate play out around the debate over discussions of Operation Midnight Hammer. Now, President Trump made sure the escalation was limited, took an off-ramp to ensure that the war didn't spiral, and there were some other things that drove that. But that's been a real concern, even among people that have traditionally supported Israel. I think one person who I point to
just not mean to interrupt, but you're talking about the strike on Iran, is correct?
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
Correct. And obviously the Israeli government was in support of that. And you had people like Steve Bannon, I think is a good example of this. Steve was very pro-Israel throughout most of his career. In the first term, he advocated moving the embassy to Jerusalem, advocated getting out of the Iran deal, and he's emerged as a prominent critic of American foreign policy towards Israel. I think it is largely his concern about getting sucked into another major Middle East war. The other thing I just want to say, too, is that you talked about the new generation of Republicans and conservatives, and I think the new right. It's an inherently contrarian movement. It's a reflexively contrarian movement, and it's conditioned to be skeptical of and reject a lot of the orthodoxies of the post-World War II, really, conservative movement, whether it's around things like economics, the role of the state, and things like the Israeli-American relationship. So when you have a lot of these people that describe themselves of the new right, whether you want to call them Trumpists, national conservatives, post-liberal members of the right, when they hear somebody like Mike Pence saying, the Israeli-American relationship is the most important thing ever, candidly, that's like waving a red flag in front of a bull and inviting people to again, with sometimes without much thought, I have to admit, just reject something. And finally, I do have to say, indisputably, there is rising anti-Semitism on the right, as I think in some areas there is on the left. Now, I do think the anti-Semitism accusation is thrown out way too much, and that actually is counterproductive. But look, when you have a guy like Nick Fuentes, in some cases his live streams getting as many views, if not more, as prominent conservative commentators, that is a warning sign, and I can't deny that. Now, again, I think there was a point where anybody that questioned, and there still is, the American-Israeli relationship was smeared as an anti-Semite, and that has been thrown around way too much. But there is a real issue here, and I would say too is, as somebody who's generally skeptical of accusations around foreign disinformation and foreign influence, I do think there are foreign actors who are promoting some of this stuff, not as a way to necessarily increase anti-Semitism, but as to increase division. And that is a real concern. So I think those are kind of the three primary things driving it on the right at the moment.
So real quickly, I mean, and Jeremy did say it was an isolationism, but when you hear a Marjorie Taylor Greene say that Israel is an affluent, technologically advanced country that has free healthcare and free education for all of its citizens, something that the United States does not have. So why are we giving $8 billion of aid a year to them? I mean, how much resonance does that have with young conservatives?
So this is a good question, and my observation is that elected officials in DC are a lagging indicator of where the conservative grassroots are and where the up-and-coming future leaders of the conservative movement are. I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene is reflecting an increasing, view, if not in some cases majority view, of certain elements of the conservative movement about what our relationship with Israel should look like. And again, I'm not somebody who agrees with her on this entirely on this issue, but she does raise a point that Israel is very affluent, very capable. And, do we need to continue to provide the level of support that we are, again, continuing some of our other commitments around the world? And honestly, you're actually hearing some of that from even more hardcore members of the pro-Israel right, who think Israel needs to become more self-sufficient, particularly in defense realms, because they don't want to be tied to the whims and changing tides of American politics. Even people like, Elliot Abrams and Eli Lake. Again, I don't want to misquote anybody, but Josh Hammer have come out and said things like that. Mm-hmm. So there's another strand there occurring on the right as well, too.
Let me ask, I'm going to bring Emmanuelle back into this. Emmanuelle came to my attention during an episode of The Daily in which she spoke, The Daily of, the podcast of the New York Times, in which she spoke about the way Israelis see the war in Gaza through the prism of a media that didn't want to cover the war the way Americans covered the war, and that Israelis didn't necessarily know, willfully or unwillfully, what was actually happening in Gaza. And I'd like Emmanuelle to tell us, do Israelis know about all of these different schisms within the American body politic, and the position that Israel right now is in, the tentative position that Israel right now is in the United States as this war comes to a close?
So maybe not in such details and a very specific scholar point of view, but definitely they know and they're worried about it. We know from the INSS, the Defense Security Research Center in Israel, that the National Security Research Center in Israel, that more than 60% of Israelis say that they are worried about the international isolation of Israel. And the relationship with the United States is really the focus of the public discourse anytime it comes up. The poll that you were giving before that, representative, about 40% of young Americans that would say that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza has been reported very largely in Israel. And any sentence by Steve Bannon on how Netanyahu shouldn't be starting a war in Iran that he cannot stop by himself is also reported very largely, because Israelis, you said, Dan, that there is this talk of maybe Israel being self-sufficient. This is really worrying the Israelis. I mean, there is this part of the right in Israel also that is understanding what's happening in the States and in the Republican Party, and is a little bit talking about that and trying to push. Even we heard Netanyahu speaking about Sparta, Israel being Sparta, and then he came back on his comments because it was understood as an economic point of view, and it wasn't a good idea. He had to explain twice that that's not exactly what he meant. He knows that Israel needs the word for cooperation, economic, academic, cultural cooperations, but he was trying to explain, and he explained that after that there are some parts of the military system and equipments that maybe Israel has to try and develop by itself. Now, I understand from experts that I ask on the questions that we are far away from this possibility, and that's not even sure that it exists. I'm not an expert on that, but I understand that trying and to sell to the Israeli public that one day we'll be self-sufficient and we will defend ourselves with the Iron Dome as much as we want without the states, it's not going to happen. And it's not only the United States. I mean, there is Germany and much more countries that Israel needs, and those countries also need Israel for its knowledge and technology and cyber and more. So, but this is completely a part of the Israeli talk. There is something always coming also on the public discourse, and it's the relationship between the American president, Donald Trump, and the Prime Minister, Netanyahu. And I think for the last few days, some very interesting scenes have to be more looked at and are going to be understood, but with more time. We've seen today Donald Trump in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, giving a speech. It's the first time he does that. It's very an historic moment. And at one point, so he was giving a lot of praise to Netanyahu and talking about peace and the new era that's going to come, and it's a new day. And he's assuring that the war is over. But then at one point, there was this moment where he turns to the Israeli president, Yitzhak Herzog, and he tells him, why won't you pardon Netanyahu? Why won't you? Basically, why not stop this trial that is being on because he's accused of corruption and more. And this is just getting inside Israeli politics in a way that is almost unimaginable a few weeks or a few months ago. But we've seen also the ambassador Huckabee coming to the trial of Netanyahu to show his support. So we know that there's not really a distance between the White House and Balfour. And more of that, it's not only personal. A few days ago, when Netanyahu came back from the States, and he has to present the agreement of the end of the war and release of the hostages to his government for it to be approved, then on both sides of him are sitting Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, the representatives of President Trump. They are inside the meeting of the government of Israel, and they are explaining to the minister what is the agreement. Now, Donald Trump today is flying to Sharm el-Sheikh and is holding this summit with the leaders of the region, the president of the
without Netanyahu, yeah.
Exactly, without Netanyahu. So there is this question about the two men are very close, they're working together. We've seen that on Iran, there's no doubt. But also there is a question of how much maneuver does Netanyahu has? What does it say of his government and his sovereignty? And what does it say also for the future of Israel and its relationship with the United States? A lot of questions and politics that are changing the region right now.
Can I ask you real quickly, and then I'm going to move on, but how do Israeli Jews view American Jews these days?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I think I think Israeli Jews have this sense that, you know, any Jew in the world is their friend anyway, and they will know what, I don't know, what side to choose. I'm not sure I can answer this question, because what is an Israeli Jew? I mean, you know, ask me and then ask my neighbor, and we'll have two different opinions also.
Okay. Abdelnasser, I want to talk to you about, as an elected member of the Democratic Party, tell me what the Democratic Party's future, the future of Israel is in the Democratic coalition.
Well, I do think that elected Democrats are also a lagging indicator of the base, and we've seen an increasing number of elected officials call for this transformation within the Democratic Party that is desperately being demanded by voters. When we hear the statistics about Americans writ large, that is when you look at the crosstabs for the Democrats, or just the numbers for the Democrats, it is overwhelmingly the picture is much more severe for Israel, right? We're talking 70, 80% of people who are extremely dissatisfied with U.S. support and U.S. arming Israel, or U.S. opposition, or our laws that are criminalizing boycotts. And I think one of the most important dynamics in politics right now is, you know, there are always swings, right? We see things, there are ebbs and flows in politics, but there are also moments when there are permanent changes in public sentiment. And I strongly believe this is a moment of permanent change. Why? Because you can't unsee the videos and the pictures that have come out of Gaza over the last 2 years. No one, myself included, most people in this room, anyone who's watching, no one can unsee that, which is why Netanyahu and the Israeli government have waged war on social media as well. And the tech companies here have shadow banned, have hidden content, have tried to remove signs of the devastation in Gaza, why they're paying influencers thousands of dollars per post, because you cannot possibly have your worldview shift permanently once these images are seared into your mind.
So could you imagine a Joe Biden type nominee emerging for the Democratic Party in 2028?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think we're going to have, I think the Democratic Party is reckoning with, I don't want to speak to what, I don't know who or what kind of nominee there will be exactly. But I know that we would be extremely foolish as a Democratic Party if we did not look at what is happening and not embark on a journey of incremental change, but of fundamental change. And I do believe that's the direction we're going. Of course, as you know, there is this fight within the Democratic establishment or within the Democratic Party. Here in Illinois, we have, you know, I introduced a bill earlier this year to repeal our state's anti-boycott law. Illinois was the first state in the country to pass a law that punishes companies if they boycott Israel. A company in Illinois, a company can boycott any of the world's 195 countries except for the state of Israel. You can boycott Canada, you can boycott the UK, you can boycott even any American state. And their pension fund won't say a word. But you boycott Israel, you get divested from, right? when I tell people that, they're like, this is shocking. They don't know that this is happening. And it comes at the, not only is it a moral abomination, it also is costing our pension fund about $150 million over the last 5 years. That is, for people who pay attention to the state budget, and I do, because I have a responsibility to the fiscal responsibility of our state, our pension funds can use some help. And when we are costing them $150 million in service of supporting the state of Israel in this way, that's not something that people support. I want to add one more thing, which is we rightfully are talking about Gaza because of the devastation and the genocide that's unfolded there. But let's not forget about what's happening in the West Bank. I'm from the West Bank. I lived for 6 years in my village in Turmusaiya, a village near Ramallah. And I was visiting in 2023, in June of 2023, before October 7th, with my family. It was after my first session in Springfield. I had just gotten sworn in. We wrapped up our first session. I was eager to go back to my village and introduce my kids and my wife to my relatives and have them get to know the village. And while we were there, a mob of Israeli settlers invaded the village in broad daylight, torched an entire neighborhood, burned houses and cars, shot 12 people, killed a young man. And my daughter, who was 7 years old at the time, held on to me and said, Dad, what do we do if we get shot? Mm-hmm. And later that night, she wouldn't go to sleep because her cousins told her the settlers could come back at night. And our state law specifically punishes companies if they're trying to stand up to that as well. Yes, to standing up to the genocide, but even if they boycott Israeli settlements, they are punished. So I believe I do believe that we are at a sea change. We are seeing a sea change in democratic politics.
And Jeremy, I want to bring you into this as well. Is there something a movement or a person in the Democratic Party that might be somewhere between what Abdelnasser would like to see and on an old line Joe Biden type Democrat?
Well, I would argue that 80% of the Democratic Party is in that middle ground, and that's precisely where J Street stands. I fundamentally,
what does that look like?
Well, I fundamentally understand where the representative is coming from as an advocate for the Palestinian American community, and I understand the focus on the boycott bill and all of that, but I don't think that is the focus of the overwhelming majority of Democrats in the party. And I also think that the old school AIPAC Israel right or wrong group in the Democratic Party is shrinking down to a very minimal core. And in the middle is a group of people that I think sounds a lot like Dan. And I think the issue is, what is the best policy for the United States? How do we actually help these two peoples, the Palestinian people and the Jewish people, to move forward? How do we actually create a regional and comprehensive peace that builds on the Abraham Accords, that normalizes relations for Israel with its neighbors, that creates a state of Palestine and makes it a state that is going to be successful and prosperous and secure and part of the community of nations? And that's where the overwhelming bulk of the center of the Democratic Party is at, that there is a consensus around Palestinian rights. There's a consensus around security for the Jewish people and the state of Israel. Both of those things are, you can't have one without the other. Israel's never going to be secure if Palestinians aren't free, and Palestinians will never be free if Israel isn't secure. And American interests are not going to be advanced if we don't find a way to get this Middle East into a more stable, forward-looking, economically focused, and prosperous territory. And that's, I think, what Dan is saying. So I'm actually relatively optimistic about where a consensus can be built in the days, weeks, months ahead. And it's going to require very, very strong bipartisan cooperation in an area where we haven't seen that for a long time, but I think there's a lot of building blocks there. And I hope that there are bridges that can be built between the Palestinian and the Jewish community that are built around a vision in which both peoples have a future that's worth living for, rather than to keep killing each other.
I just want to say, I'm not advocating just for the Palestinian American position. I don't think Americans or Democrats want state repression against companies that boycott Israel. I would assume J Street probably would agree,
Oh,
hopefully agrees that we
absolutely, we
shouldn't have an
oppose these boycott
anti-boycott
laws.
law that punishes a company.
Yeah, no,
that-
we're aligned, but that's not I mean, to me, that's not the issue of the day. The issue of the day is
At
how do
least
we
we're
end this
aligned on that.
conflict?
I appreciate that.
You know, and so we're opposed to boycott bills, and I think, you know, these limitations on freedom of speech, specifically around Israel and the use of anti-Semitism, and Dan alluded to that as well. You know, these attacks on they happen on the right and the left, where you try to shut down open debate by calling people an anti-Semite, and then you take away funding for the University of Chicago, right? And you take away, you know, students' visas, and you take away the right of First Amendment speech, all in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. This is not good for anyone, least of all the Jewish people.
All right, I think that's a great note to turn to questions from our students. Am I supposed to recognize them? All right, okay. How about you first?
Hi, thank you. For a long time in the US, the sort of enlightened solution that politicians have offered is the two-state solution, which would not necessarily address freedom of movement of Palestinians or the right to return. So I was wondering where everyone on the panel was around a one-state solution that would be one person, one vote, freedom of movement, and whether that's like a realistic possibility.
You know, I don't know if you all heard this question. It's kind of near and dear to my heart because I've been hearing about the notion of a one-state solution since I was in Israel as a college student, and the idea that Israel would become something like Switzerland, where you would have one national government, but then you would have perhaps a Jewish government over the Jews and Arab government over the Arab and Palestinians, and then there would be somehow everyone would have equality, but somehow I don't know how. It's hard to imagine how it works, but first I'm gonna I want Emmanuelle to answer that because I'm sure that you know the two-state versus one-state solution has been around for Israel for a long time.
I'm really happy to answer that because I'm not asked in Israel. This question is not talking about in Israel. Everything that Jeremy is talking about on this discussion is not happening in the public discussion in Israel. I said on Israeli TV last Saturday, when they were talking about stopping attacking there, or can we fight Hamas again, or not fighting Hamas again on a news talk show, I just said, well, maybe we also have to start understanding that there must be another solution to this region than the military solution. And everybody jumped at me, like, you're in the Middle East. And I said, well, we have to talk about that. A week before, and I said, they all told me, you want to do peace with Hamas? I said, no, there is a Palestinian Authority that has to go through reforms. They asked me if I believe it. I said, it's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of reforms that are being checked now. Right now, there is a process being done. That's what Donald Trump is talking about, and the region is talking about. And I'm saying that because the ideas you're trying to work with are not spoken in Israel, and I think it's part of the problem. The Israeli public does not understand that there is no status quo. If nobody takes care of the Palestinian-Israeli problem, or Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the solution will happen to be the one state. It's a matter of demographics. Maybe they want that, but if they don't, it will be too late. So, and I can guarantee you that if you propose the one state solution to the Israelis, 90% will say no, as now most of the Israelis are also not keen to go for the two-state solution, although when you put it in a matter of regional agreement, then you have a big majority. When it comes with normalization with Saudi and the Gulf states, then and more Arabic and Islamic states, then you have a majority for this two-state solution. But the Israeli public is not aware that the alternative to the two-state solution right now is a one-state solution by a demographic movement and not by choice. So because Netanyahu, and I will finish by that, and his government have done an amazing job of hiding the Palestinians from the media, from the public discourse, and as Gaza is not shown for the last 2 years on TV, and not even before actually, the West Bank Neither. It's almost not happening. So I wish that the talk we are having right now would be an open mainstream talk in Israel.
Hi, thank you all for being here. So at the forefront of Jeremy Ben-Ami's organization, J Street, is the idea that leaders need to confront extremist or dehumanizing rhetoric within the Jewish and Israeli communities and politics. So to the representative, do you see a similar responsibility among Palestinian or Arab leaders to counter extremist narratives within their own communities, and what does that look like in practice?
I believe we need to always aim for truth. And if there are conspiracies about the Jewish people, we need to confront that head on, for example. Or and I think one of the things that we've seen over the last 2 years and is that there has been a more of a recognition that we need to address what happened before October 7 as well. The timeline did not begin on October 7. And when we start the questions, as you've seen in the media, left and right, and among elected officials, left and right, always beginning the timeline as if the world in Israel-Palestine began on October 7. And then, well, what do you think of Hamas? And what do you think of this? Well, what about the 1,200 Palestinians or 1,100 Palestinians who were killed in 2008, 2009? What about the more than 2,000 in Gaza? The more than 2,000 Palestinians that were killed in 2014? What about the 600 Palestinians in the West Bank that were killed in 2023 alone before October 7 by settler terrorists? And when we begin the timeline on October 7, we are erasing the pain and suffering that Palestinians have confronted. And we need to be able to have this larger conversation. Are we going to talk about the Nakba? Are we going to talk about the myth of a people without a land without a people for a people without a land, a myth that persisted until the Israeli new historians in the 1980s, like Benny Morris and Avi Schleim and Ilan Pape, completely debunked. But that myth led to entrenched U.S. support for Israel. And so, yes, of course, we have a responsibility to confront falsehoods and to confront extremism. And the way that we do that is, let's talk about truth. Let's talk about real history. For those who haven't read Rashid Khadidi's book, The 100 Years War on Palestine, please read it. If you're not reading or listening to Peter Beinart, listen to Peter Beinart, right? Go to people who have really grappled with the history and who evolved, like Peter, who I had vigorous disagreements with when I was an undergrad. I was very much, I objected to some of the things that he stated, and there's been a lot of growth and so my short answer is we have to confront, aim at truth.
Jeremy, because your name was evoked here and J Street was evoked, I thought you should join in.
So yeah, look, I think that the history is exceedingly important, and the search for truth is going to be very elusive, unfortunately, because we are all going to have our own truths here. And what I think is very helpful to acknowledge is that both people have a history, both people have a narrative, both peoples have a connection to the exact same land, both peoples have suffered a great deal. There's a legacy of tragedy and victimhood for the Jewish people and for the Palestinian people, and nobody's going to win a competition over who suffered more at whose hands. And at the end of the day, when one acknowledges all of that, the truth and the history and the pain and the suffering and all of it, both peoples need a place to call home. And it goes to the first question, which is the one-state question. Both of these peoples need a space that is the place where they fulfill their collective right to self-determination. They both need a national homeland, and that national homeland is going to have a border, and the border of the national homeland of the Jewish people is going to be the border of the national homeland of the Palestinian people. And I don't use the phrase two-state solution anymore because I think it's become very trite and it's lost a lot of its meaning. But I do think that you can't have a solution to this without a state that is the national homeland of the Palestinian people, the state of Palestine. I think the world is coming to recognize that. We saw that at the UN 2 weeks ago with this wave of recognition of a state of Palestine. And what the Trump 20-point plan and this conference that's happening as we speak right now in Sharm el-Sheikh is happening. You have 20 world leaders coming together on a drop of a dime to get together to commit to trying to make this pathway work. There's a New York Declaration. I hope the students will all look it up afterwards. That was signed by 140 something countries around the world that outlines the path to a Palestinian state. There are these 20 points. There is a principle here that leads you, what I call it, a 23-state solution. The 23 states of the Arab League and the state of Israel reaching a regional, comprehensive agreement. One of the 22 states is the state of Palestine, and we need borders, we need security, we need governance reform, and we need a sense of economic future. But there is no one state. One state is the problem. One state is what we have right now. There is only one state between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, and then you have 5 million people who have absolutely no rights underneath that one state. So this is the problem. One state is the problem. The solution is a border, the creation of a Palestinian state, and a regional comprehensive approach that I call the 23-state solution.
Okay, we're going to move on. Okay.
Yeah, I have two small questions. One question is regarding the, okay, it will be really quick. So one question is regarding the Gaza war. Like Israel have shown its ambition of wanting the Gaza even without the Gazans. So how do we see like the end result of this war, since the elements of today's anarchy like Hamas was created by Israel, as confirmed by Brigadier Yitzhak as well. So like, do we see any sort of new elements of cleansing or mass destruction? Because since the Gazans are trying to get back to the Gaza. And secondly, Israel's ambition about the territorial ambitions, since like there was a statement of Israel's foreign minister who showed ambitions that the borders of Israel should be till Damascus. So as we see that, should these countries like surrender these territories peacefully to the Israel, or will we see another war to conquer all these territories? Thank you.
I'm going to ask, actually, I'm going to ask Emmanuelle and Dan this question. I mean, you certainly heard voices within Israel, even within the Israeli government, who talk about, possession of Gaza or expansionism of the Israeli state. That is not the government's policy. I mean, stated. Nobody. The government of Netanyahu has actually not said they want to take over Gaza. But I'm curious. I mean, how serious, when we hear voices in the Israeli government, within the Israeli cabinet, who talk about like taking over Gaza, parts of Gaza permanently, or maybe expanding beyond the Golan Heights permanently, how seriously should we take those voices?
I was going to ask that Dan goes. I talked a lot already.
Oh, Dan. All right.
Emmanuelle, I'll defer to you on the Israeli government, how seriously we should take people like.
Then Dan, I'll ask you about the Trump government. You were in the Trump government when Donald Trump was talking about taking over Gaza and making a beachfront property there. We don't hear that anymore, and it is a question. It's like these things come up, and then you think,
yeah,
am I supposed to take this seriously? How am I supposed to take this?
I think you need to, first and foremost on that question, you need to look at the actual policy being implemented. And we did not see a serious move towards that. I honestly think from what I observed and what I heard is that, that was a result of a conversation that Steve Witkoff had with the president coming back from Gaza and just being horrified by the level of destruction. And, being two real estate guys, that's kind of where their minds went. But again, I can tell you there was really no serious policy movement on that front. But I do want to address, though, I'll defer on the political side, but on this idea of Israeli territorial expansion and holding Gaza. And I think it's important to understand like two things when having these type of conversations is one, intent, but also capability. And I will tell you this is that, there was a lot of discussion about Israel. You heard David Petraeus talk about this, and, candidly, I don't think you should listen to David Petraeus so much of anything. But Israel needed a clear hold build in Gaza, like do an American style counterinsurgency campaign. Again, never mind, those didn't really work out so well in Iraq and Afghanistan, but you had some folks talking about that. That would have been an extremely costly endeavor for Israel in terms of activating large numbers of reservists for an extended period of time, which had significant impact on their economy, and also required a lot of military resources from the United States, certain types of ammunition, equipment that in some cases we may have not been able to provide in quantity because of our support to other partners, including Ukraine. And so I think you need to apply that similar framework to things that could happen in Syria, Lebanon, or elsewhere. Is that, in my view, the Israeli military, specifically its ground forces, while they maintain some very extraordinary capabilities, have been ground down by over 2 years of war. And to achieve those things would be extremely costly to Israel and their society. And again, I'll defer to Emmanuelle, who is there in Israel. But based on some of my observations when I was in the administration and outside of it, I don't think that there is the capability, and even outside of some extreme circles, really the will or the intent to go ahead and do some of that.
Emmanuelle, I do want to ask you that real quickly.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
there is a weird sense of, in both Israel and in the United States, is kind of do as I look at what I do, not what I say, because some of the things that both governments say is insane. I mean, is that the sense in Israel as well? Like, don't listen
Completely.
to Ben-Gvir, don't listen to Smotrich.
Well, that's a tricky one because I a little bit disagree with Dan on something, is that there were some steps on the ground that would make you ask the question after March when the war was renewed. And then there was the Gideon chariots operation. And Netanyahu was explaining that the idea is to do GHF, was the distribution aid centers that were built like the Israeli-American project. And he also, when he explained that, he said that the idea is to have the population moving south. So then, and he was quoting Netanyahu, he was quoting Trump saying, we can embrace part of the Trump plan. And he was talking about the Riviera transfer of the population. So that was Netanyahu saying, but Netanyahu months before that said that there is no plan of occupying Gaza. But then when you say it's not the policy of the government, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are not important ministers. They are main ministers in the government, and both were very specific. Smotrich said, we're not going to give the land from one Arab to the other one. And he was saying just a few weeks ago that he's in talks with the American administration about the land, and that is going to be very, very lucrative, the land of Gaza. And then Ben-Gvir was talking about having a city for the policemen of Israel in Gaza. So they were very eloquent about their plans of occupying Gaza, having Jewish settlements there. And you already have a few, there are not even like 10, 20%, but a few settlers at the border of Gaza ready to get inside and having settlements as they can. After I said all of that, there is now a clear plan with 20 points. The 20 points that have been signed by the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, there is no settlements. There is no occupying Gaza. It's not part of the plan. And Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they do not get their will right now. And there is no plan for it in the future right now. There is even exactly the opposite of what they want, which is a Palestinian state somehow coming along in the future, or at least the recognition of a Palestinian state and aspiration for the Palestinian people. So it's very confusing, but it's also very much, I think, the Netanyahu way of doing. He goes one step after and he adapts to what is right now. And I think he also didn't really have a choice. But does Netanyahu want to occupy Gaza and have the Jewish settlements there? I don't think so. I don't think this is his ideology. He didn't say at any point, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, stop talking, we're not going with your ideas. That could have been helpful. Also, when we talk about the international community and backlash to Israel. But now when what's important is happening, which is which paper is signed, which agreement is going forward, and what's going to happen on the ground, we see that they lost their way, and towards a political solution with no occupying of Gaza is winning right now. And that also asks the question of why they're staying in the government, but it's another question.
That's another question.
Yeah, for another time.
Okay. We have time for one more question real quick.
Yeah, my question is for Jeremy. My question for Jeremy is, would you support prosecution and a war crimes tribunal of the Israeli government members and of Israeli soldiers who have committed war crimes? Because you're presenting yourself as, oh, we're this like middle ground position, but I don't get what's middle ground about being a lobbyist for a genocidal state that just exterminated hundreds of thousands of people. So would you support a war crimes tribunal, like a new version of a Nuremberg trial, or are you just trying to put some kind of a moderate spin on a genocide?
Okay, well, finish with that nice, easy question.
Yes, okay, good note to end on. So yes, I'm not a lobby for a genocidal state. I am a lobbyist in the United States, and I am interested in what American foreign policy is going to be. I support the right of the Jewish people and the right of the Palestinian people to both have states. That's what I am a lobbyist for. I want to see peace and an end to this conflict. I also do think that it is very important, and J Street supports the rule of international law, and Israel and all other states, every state, should be held to account under international law. And so it is appropriate when those courts, whether they're the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice, pursue states that violate international law, whether it's Israel or another state. It's inappropriate when the United States tries to penalize the court and its officials and the people who work there for going only after the state of Israel. What happens to Israel and to Benjamin Netanyahu and to others in the international courts will be a matter of those judges and that system to decide. And hopefully the people who did the things that I believe are immoral will also face their day of judgment when they face their maker one day. That's the greatest sense of accountability that people they'll have to live with themselves over what they did here. I could not live with myself over what was done if I were them, but the courts that exist and the laws that exist should be enforced, and people should be held accountable.
Okay, apparently we have time for one very quick question.
Yeah, so super quick question, Emmanuelle or Dan, whoever's able to answer. I know before October 7th in Israel, we were seeing a lot of these black flag protests regarding the gross and undemocratic expansion of executive power within Israel and restrictions to the Supreme Court there. We were seeing a lot of protests for that as well. What do you see as the future for Netanyahu within the government within Israel? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think that's most appropriately for Emmanuelle, who has been asked and is answering many questions. So we're going to let you finish up with that because, all right, back to before October 7th.
I'll be very quick. So we are in an election year, if we want it or not. It's official. The elections are planned for October 226, but it's probably going to happen before. And I've been actually writing on that today for a French paper, talking to a lot of experts on the issue. Everybody agrees to say that it just depends on Netanyahu. If he wants to go for elections now because he wants to capitalize on the return of the hostages and he sees good polls for him, he will do it. If he has to wait for the budget not to pass, maybe in March, then it will be around June and July. The idea is that he needs a coalition, and we are kind of in a stuck place, very similar maybe to what happened in 2019 until 2021, where there were elections after elections after elections, where the coalition and the opposition are neither able to actually really come with a majority. So that could happen, and I'm saying that because this means everything's going to come back on the table. Every ugliness that you've seen before October 7th, I believe it's necessary. I believe Israel is at a point, and we understood that during this protest, where Israel has to ask itself, which country am I? Am I a liberal country? Am I a religious country? Can I be both? How am I Jewish and democratic? What are my core issues, core pillars, values? And these questions are very, very, they've never been really resolved. They have to be, they will come back on the table. So a lot of what you've seen before October 7th, I think will come back, but in different shapes. The main issue will probably be that the big majority of the Israeli public is asking for an inquiry, investigation to October 7th and what led to it and what happened on this day, which Netanyahu doesn't want to have. And that will be the main demand and going back and forth. And from that, a lot is going to come out and we'll see. Maybe peace will take over and then we won't have to go and deal with all of that.